Hey, my family. Happy Friday and welcome back to another week on Guns and Butter with your favorite cousin, Kinda G. I hope you all had a marvelous week, but come on into this dinner table, sit down, get comfortable, and without further ado, let's jump right into this week's case.
That's what it's all about. Guns and butter, baby.
All right, cousins. So this week at the dinner table, I'm going to be telling y'all about the murder of 32-year-old Dominique Clayton. Dominique was born in May of 1987 in Oxford, Mississippi. For most of us, we know Oxford because it's home to Ole Miss, and it's a really small college town, and everybody pretty much knows everybody. So growing up in Mississippi, Dominique had a bubbly and easygoing personality. So Dominique was a single mother to 4 children, but she was very involved in every aspect of their lives. Now, as it typically does for a single mother, her world revolved around her kids, and she made sure that they didn't ever have to want for nothing. They always had a roof over their head, clothes on their back, and food on their table. But she was really family oriented and she had a lot of support from her family. Her mama actually stayed right next door, so she was always just a phone call or an arm's reach away when she needed to help out with her grandkids. But Dominique was still young and she had a lot of life to live. And as a mother of 4, it was kind of hard to find the balance and not lose herself within her children. So it was really a blessing that her mom lived right next door. And she was always willing to help out when she needed so that her daughter was able to still enjoy her life. So in college towns, you have that one specific like bar district where everybody goes to hang out and drink and party. Like for me at Texas Tech, it was Broadway. But for Ole Miss, it's called the Square. So one night in 2018, Dominique is hanging out at the Square. And while she's out enjoying herself with the girls, she meets a nice man by the name of Matthew Kinney. The moment they meet, they were instantly attracted to one another. They sparked up a conversation, they got to drinking, they got to flirting, and they just clicked instantly. All right, cousins, I'm just going to throw this out there real quick. Dominique is a black woman, and Matthew is a white man. And not only is he a white man, but he's also the police for the city of Oxford. So neither the color of his skin nor his occupation bothered Dominique whatsoever. Now, Dominique was thinking about going into law enforcement herself, so the fact that Matthew was a lawman really piqued her interest. So Matthew wasn't just a regular old police officer. He was a part of the Mounted Patrol Unit, which is a cop that rides horseback. Kind of neat, right? So within days of meeting, they were pretty much a couple. You know how it is. You meet somebody you really like, get to hanging out day in, day out, talking, and that's your man. That's your woman. So they start making time for one another, fitting each other into their busy schedules, and that's really how their relationship kicked off. So for Dominique, Matthew was her absolute dream come true. She's a single mother, so she wasn't used to having all this help and attention from a man. Because let me tell you, Matthew came in and he started helping her pay bills. He went out and bought her a car, and he was even helping her put money to the side so that she can save up for a new home. My kind of man right there, okay? And my girl Dominique must have had that ill na-na, because within a couple of months, Matthew gave her a promise ring to show her how committed he was to their relationship. And she was just head over heels for her man Matthew. So on Sunday, May 19th, 2019, it's around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and Dominique's 8-year-old son comes home from hanging out with his uncle all weekend. So when he gets home, he wants to tell his mom about his weekend. So he running through the house, Mom, where are you? He busts in her room and he finds her laying in the bed. But this wasn't just his normal old sleeping mama. He sees blood coming from her head and she's completely unresponsive. So he runs back outside and next door to his grandma's house to tell her his mama's not waking up. So she's like, Lord, grandson, go to my house and hang out for a second. Let me go over here and check on your mama. So she goes over next door to Dominique's house. When she gets inside, she goes to her room and she finds her daughter in bed, face down and unresponsive. So she immediately calls the police. When the officers get there, they confirm that Dominique is in fact dead. They find a single gunshot wound to her head, and at first, They thought it was a suicide. But a suicide would only make sense if they found a gun in the bed with her or somewhere near her. That would be the only way for it to make sense. So they quickly rule out the suicide. So they start looking around her house and they don't find any signs of a struggle or any signs of forced entry. So her death is now ruled a homicide. So while the investigators are going through the home trying to collect as much evidence as they can, the family does inform them that Dominique is dating an officer that works for their police department. So because he works for the department, it would be a conflict of interest for them to continue working the case. So with that being said, they had to hand the case over to the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation, or MBI. So when the MBI gets there, they start combing the scene, and they find a single .380 slug in the pillow Dominique was laying on. They can tell she was obviously sleeping, and she didn't see or hear her killer coming. So they find the slug, but they don't find the shell casing. So the investigators assume that the killer either picked it up or the bullet came from a revolver. So in order to get some more information about Dominique and what types of things she could have been into that got her killed, detectives turn to her family to find out what happened in the hours leading up to her death. So her mother tells investigators that Dominique came home from the square a little after midnight. She says she was waking up a little bit, but she seen Dominique's headlights pulling into the driveway. Her family also lets investigators know that she was well known and well loved within the community. And the only person that they knew her to have a problem with was her neighbor Isaiah Hill. They said Dominique and Isaiah had gotten into a couple of altercations because Isaiah was always playing loud music, having loud parties, having people over, just pretty much being the neighbor from hell, disturbing her and her kids' peace. But they go on to let detectives know that Dominique and Matthew were in a pretty happy and healthy relationship. But they also throw out there that Matthew's married. I guess the healthy part was the communication, where he let her know that he was married. And she was okay with it. So for them, that was happy and healthy. We gonna leave him alone. So the gag is, not only did Dominique know that he was married, but her family also knew he was married too. But they weren't really too bothered by it because they knew Matthew loved her, and that was really all that mattered, Dominique's happiness. So this big piece of information puts the case into another perspective for the investigators, because a married man having an affair with a woman who was just murdered changes the dynamics of the investigation a little bit. So their little detective wheels start turning, and they start thinking, maybe his wife found out he was having an affair and killed her in a jealous rage. So to kick the investigation off, the MBI heads over to the Lafayette Sheriff's Department to speak with Matthew himself. So in his initial interview, he comes off very professional and as a concerned boyfriend who seems really heartbroken by his girlfriend's death. So he's like, I understand how this goes. It's standard procedure. You just have to rule me out. I know that. So he starts off by saying he and Dom hit it off really quickly, and he really did care for her. He lets him know the last time he seen her was last night, so the news of her death hit him like a ton of bricks. He lets them know that on Saturday night he was on duty, but he and Dominique were texting all throughout the night while she was out at the bar. He says for majority of the night he was at the stables tending to the mounted patrol horses, but around midnight Dominique called him asking him for a ride to her car because it was storming really bad. So being the magnificent boyfriend that he is, he goes and picks her up and drops her off at her car. He says he drove back to the stables afterwards and then she called him when she made it home. Now typically, he would swing by her house on his way home after his shift, but on this night, he says that she had a long night out, she was really tired, so she wasn't in the mood. So for those reasons, he didn't go see her that night. But he lets the MBI know that he was at the stables until around 2:30 in the morning, and he texted Dom goodnight around that same time. He gives him permission to go through his phone to corroborate the timeline of the events he just talked about, and everything seems to check out. Now at this point in time, detectives want to go speak with Matthew's wife, Amy Michelle, to see how much she knows about the affair. When they get over to their house, his wife is clueless about Dominique. So finding out about her husband's extramarital affairs and the fact that the mistress is dead came as a complete shock to Miss Amy Michelle. But the important thing is they were able to rule her out as a suspect. So they head back to the square to retrace Dominique's steps from that night. They end up speaking with one of the homegirls she was out with that night, and she confirms everything from Matthew's story about Dominique calling him and asking for a ride to her car. Her friend does let them know that she didn't peep anything off about their night out, but she too throws out the neighbor Isaiah's name as somebody who could have possibly wanted to harm Dominique. So this is now the second time this neighbor has been brought up. The friend tells detectives Dominique had Isaiah arrested. He was always throwing loud parties, and the police weren't doing anything about it. So Dominique did some digging and found out that he had some warrants in DeSoto County, which is about an hour away. So she reached out to the county and had him arrested. And lo and behold, he was released the day before she was murdered. Now you know they had to bring Isaiah in, but he denies having anything to do with her murder. He says that he was in Memphis for his daughter's high school graduation, and he stayed the night at his mom's house, and he didn't get back to Mississippi until Sunday. And he's like, me? Y'all think I did this to her? Nah, I'll tell you what you need to do. Y'all need to be looking into that dirty cop that's always hanging around her house. Now, Isaiah's alibi did check out about him being in Memphis, but the little thing he said about Matthew being a dirty cop really sparked the investigators' interest. So they do a little bit more research into his past, and they uncover Matthew had resigned from his previous position in the city of Olive Branch. And after reaching out to that department, they find out that he didn't resign on his own. He was asked to. And it turns out Mr. Matthew left the department in Olive Branch under a cloud of suspicion of misconduct during an investigation. And cousins, listen to this mess. His former wife was killed from a single gunshot wound to the head, just like Dominique. Very suspicious now, ain't it? And Matthew was a suspect in this murder too. Now, eventually her murder was ruled a suicide, but the contact at his old department says that Matthew was a big person of interest in the case. Although he was never arrested, there was so many questions surrounding this incident that he pretty much was forced to resign. After he resigned, he moved to Oxford and took the position at the Oxford Police Department. He then met his new wife, had 2 children, and he moved on with his life. But 3 years after moving to Oxford, Matthew met Dominique, and their affair started shortly after that. Now, even though Matthew was exonerated of having any connection with his previous wife's death, the NBI just couldn't shake the feeling that he may have had something to do with Dominique's. And they want to make sure they're not overlooking any critical information in this investigation. So they subpoena his phone records to track his exact movements the night Dominique was murdered. But unfortunately for them, his phone records confirm his initial statements. And it does appear that he was at the stables when Dominique called him at midnight, and he was also there when he texted her goodnight at 2:30. But they like that just cannot be it. So they keep digging. And they see that for a good hour and a half, there was absolutely no record of phone activity. So they think that he possibly left his phone behind and snuck back to Dominique's house to kill her. Now, this idea sounds good and all, but they still had to prove it. So they turn to the surveillance video from Dominique's neighborhood, and they find a video from the gas station that captured the intersection right outside of the neighborhood. Now, in the surveillance video, they see an Oxford police car crossing the intersection at about 2:05 a.m. So the video wasn't clear enough to see who the driver was or the cruiser number, but detectives have a strong feeling that the driver was Matthew. So they contact the Oxford Police Department to find out if there was any reason why an officer would be in that location during that time. And the dispatcher denies any reason for an officer to be in that area during that time. So this is just enough information to bring Matthew back in for a second interview. But during this interview, they read him his Miranda rights. Now this man is the law himself, so he knows exactly how this shit go. So instead of asking for a lawyer, he waives his right to an attorney and spills all the juicy tea. He says he was tired of all the constant pressure of Dominique always wanting more from him. And he says he just wanted his old life back. He says, look, I'm not a rich man, and it was just non-stop with her. So I tried to break things off, but she threatened to tell my wife. So the only option I had to end the affair was to get rid of her. So he says he's seen this as a perfect opportunity to carry out his plan the night Dominique told him not to come over because she was too tired. So he left his phone at the stables, loaded his service weapon with a .380 round, and he went through with his plan. He says he snuck into her house and he stood over her as she slept. Now he says at first he couldn't bring himself to do it, but after he started thinking about everything he could lose if he was exposed, he manned up and he shot her one time in the back of the head. He says he left her house and went back to the stables, and at 2:30 he sent her that goodnight text, knowing full well she would never receive that message. So this was everything the investigators needed. So after he confessed, his fake police ass was arrested. Yeah, and charged with capital murder too. Now his trial was set to begin in the summer of 2020, but we all remember what was happening during that time. George Floyd had just been killed, Breonna Taylor's case was going on, and there was already so much stuff going on in the world with police brutality. So folks were pissed and the tensions were high, and they wanted justice for Dominique. So with all this stuff going on in the world, I guess Matthew was starting to feel the pressure. So on July 30th, 2021, he pled guilty to capital murder, and he was sentenced to life. The Oxford police said, "Yeah, we gonna send you a message, Matthew. You was once the law, but you are not above it." Now, this case pissed me off because this dummy killed a single mother of 4. All of that because he was afraid his little dirty secret of their affair was going to get back to his wife. And cases like this really get under my skin because it's officers like Matthew Kinney who skate through their career thinking they can get over on people, think that they're just so above the law, so above punishment that they can just go around killing folks with no consequences. But in this case, I'm glad they got his ass. And a federal judge actually awarded Dominique's family $2.2 million in a wrongful death lawsuit. As they freaking should have, finding out that he was a suspect in a previous murder similar to this one, and he was still hired by another police department. Yeah, y'all gonna run me that 2.2 mil. But all right, cousins, this was a pretty short case this week. I hope y'all enjoyed, and I'll see y'all back here same place, same time next week.
That's what it's all about. Guns